The ultimate classic meatloaf is full of delicious rounded flavor. It starts with some sauteed vegetables. You're gonna see why that's important. It finishes with a glaze on top, as it should. Perfect for a weeknight, perfect for a weekend. It's just perfect. Let's make some. For ultimate meatloaf, you need to have all delicious ingredients, but also make sure it comes together to be that classic traditional flavor we all want. So this is a meatloaf that has, of course, ground beef and my favorite ground pork mixed together. I think those two are important, but more so it has all these vegetables that are gonna be kind of ground up, but then cooked in butter and put into it so it becomes this beautifully unctuous, juicy, just like full of flavor meatloaf without realizing why it's full of flavor. And that's the important part, and that's what we're starting with, is all these vegetables. Now I'm roughly chopping them, like you can see this onion. It's massively just chopped in big pieces. That's because guess what? I am letting that food processor do the work. Why? Because trying to mince everything evenly and perfectly isn't as fun. And also, the whole point here is that we want these flavors to really cook down and just meld into this meatloaf and become one with the meat. So that means we don't want to have massive pieces of vegetable. We want to actually have what end up being really small pieces. So I'm chopping them in rough, big pieces that then this food processor is just going to cook down and let everything just work together. And that's kind of the important part, is let something else do the work for you when you don't, have to go as hard as you think you do. Now for the mushrooms, the reason we're adding mushrooms, it seems like an odd one. Celery, carrot, onion, you can get behind and think, yeah, okay, that kind of makes sense. Mushrooms actually can add a really nice meaty flavor underneath, especially when they're cooked down. And I think we often forget that because we either saute them or whatever it is, but in this case, we're gonna let them just cook down and really take in that meatiness. Now notice I'm also putting in the stems because, well, one, we're just gonna chop them up, so why not? And it looks like I'm filling this up, and I am, but that's because it's gonna do all the work for us. Now, when it comes to carrots, you know this with me on other things. I scrubbed the carrots, I did not peel them. I don't see the point of peeling off part of the carrot when it's in good shape, it's scrubbed, they're great, they're healthy, they're delicious. I'm not gonna worry about that. I'm cutting up in big pieces. That's all that matters. We're gonna throw them right in too. See how easy this is? I love this. And then for the garlic, I took off that stem or that little root end, and now I'm just gonna leave them like they are. Make sure I get the skins off. If the skins don't come off easily, just either the heel of your hand, just go through and smash them. Then that skin is able just to much more come right off because it bruises them. Or you can take a knife and just give them a little whack, and that too should bruise them just enough that that skin wants to come off. See how easy that is? And if they have a bad spot on them, this one does. I home grow this, so if it does, I don't feel that bad, but I just slice it off, no big deal. And I'm gonna throw those in. So we're gonna keep pulsing this. It might take a little bit since I filled it up, but then we'll get it all ground down. So you can see we want it finely ground, but not a paste. We don't want it to be juicy or liquidy. It's just before it would become a paste. So it's nicely kind of evenly ground. The mushrooms make it somewhat brown, and that's okay. So now we're gonna take it over to some butter that I have melting. And the reason I'm doing butter is why? Flavor. We wanna add flavor to this and make it really beautiful. So I have the butter going, and I'm gonna just put in all this mixture, which is the beautiful part here, because what this mixture is gonna do is while it kind of sautés, it's gonna cook out even more of that liquid. So we're gonna get some of the extra moisture content out of there, which is important. But it's also gonna start taking on more flavor, sauteing and cooking down, and bringing all those flavors together. Now, of course, the important part here is once you have it cooking, which you can hear a little bit of a sizzle there, it's starting to cook, we wanna make sure we salt it too at this point. This is a lot of vegetables, and we're gonna be using a lot of meat, so it's really important to actually start adding the flavor at each level. So I'm gonna start cooking this, sauteing it till it cooks down, and we can keep going. So I'm chopping up some thyme. Fresh thyme with meatloaf and these vegetables just is the perfect, to me, accompaniment. So these vegetables that we minced in the food processor have really cooked down. That moisture is cooked off them, and you can see how it's getting dry on the bottom of the pan. That's what you want, and they're all softened, and so we're gonna add in that thyme, and then a little bit of tomato paste. Now remember, this is the ultimate meatloaf, so I wanna make sure there are just beautiful flavors throughout. So putting in some tomato paste right now, and stirring it in and cooking it is really gonna bring on this beautiful richness to this whole mixture. And I wanna make sure I cook it in so it becomes almost like a sweet caramelized flavor. So it's been cooking for just a couple minutes, and it doesn't look too much different other than it gets more dry. It starts to almost wanna stick to the bottom. That's when it's done. And you wanna let this cool off now. You just don't wanna add it steaming hot to the meat, obviously. So now we can move on just to mixing everything together. We're gonna start with some eggs. So eggs bind things together. They add a little bit of body, and that's really important in something like this. You know, you have a lot of kind of varying components and you want it to hold together somewhat cohesively. So eggs are actually important. And I like to mix them first. So I'm putting them into the bowl, breaking them up and just whisking them because then they will more evenly whisk and mix in with everything else. And that's important. You don't want like pieces of egg white or yolk or just unmixed in egg. So it's important to just be able to whisk them. And now that will mix in really evenly. So for the meat, obviously ground beef is more traditional. I like the mixture of ground pork and ground beef. One, that's what I grew up with, but the pork actually lightens the beef. And I think that's really kind of important here, is to have it be a little bit lighter. And I like that component. So we're gonna put that right in there. I'm gonna set this behind me. Now we have everything else. So I wanna make sure we have a good array of flavors and textures to make this juicy, not dry, hold together, have a lot of just like oomph to it. So what we have here is some Worcestershire sauce. It's that secret sauce that really amps up a flavor, especially meaty flavors. So it does a super amazing job at bringing out even more of those meat tones with the beef and with everything else. Breadcrumbs, super important. This is actually gonna help it hold on to moisture. And you want that because that moisture is really just gonna like lock in with these breadcrumbs. You're not gonna notice they're there. They're gonna absorb it and kind of go away. And that's the best part of it. A little bit of mustard. You could do yellow. I always do Dijon because flavor, please, of course. A little bit more salt and pepper. We season the vegetables, but we need to make sure we season here too. And the pepper is just gonna add that beautiful peppery note that I think is just essential. And then some beef stock. Now, you could do a chicken stock obviously, but the beef stock amps it up even more. It adds to that beefiness and it really just will help bind it all together with those breadcrumbs. So we're gonna pour that in and just keep letting this mixture cool off just enough so we can add that now too. So obviously this looks like nothing special at the moment, but we do have this beautiful flavor we're gonna add too with the vegetables. And that I think is really the secret component here. You don't see what they are, but what you are gonna notice is once they're in there is this beautiful flavor. And the beef is just gonna be amped up into an even more full flavor. And that's what is important here is each item that we're putting into this, some of them may seem like they're not important, but they're playing a beautiful role in actually bringing all the flavor out in this. So we're gonna put it in there and I'm gonna admit, you can use a spoon to stir this. You can. You can try to start and just like slowly bring it together. Let's be honest, the two hands that are at the end of your arms, they're gonna work best to actually form all this together. So this is one where you do get usually messy, but we're gonna actually start getting messy. We're gonna go in there with our hands, mix it all together, and then we'll put it out onto a baking sheet and really form that loaf. Another reason it's actually important to do this with your hands, you really wanna make sure all that meat is incorporated evenly or you're gonna have pockets of meat that you can tell wasn't mixed in with the extras, and that isn't good. So once it's fully mixed, we can now just put it on to I'm doing a parchment-lined baking sheet. Now, I know some people are very used to maybe putting it into a loaf pan. I'm one of those people that I'm doing it the way my mom always did it or the way my grandma did it. And that's this way, where we form it free more on a baking sheet or put it into a smaller casserole, I guess. But I think that was because one, then if there is any residual fat or liquid, it kind of can drain away. But also it gives you the ability just to kind of nicely form it. So I'm gonna just roughly form it. And I'm gonna be honest, if you're not a meat person, I get it. This is weird. So this doesn't have to be for you, but this does create a meatloaf that I feel like everyone in the family is gonna love. And that to me is what's important here. Kids love this, adults love this. Anyone who loves leftovers loves this, because let me tell you something, meatloaf sandwiches are where it's at. I will make meatloaf so I can have meatloaf sandwiches. It's one of the small joys in life, a meatloaf sandwich. So I'm just finishing smoothing this over. I'm gonna wash my hands. We'll put together a quick, you gotta have some ketchup on top. And we'll put that on and we'll bake it. Once the meatloaf is formed, I just put a little bit of prepared ketchup with a little bit of mustard. Yeah, you gotta have mustard. I know some people like brown sugar, I don't know. I like it sometimes, but the thing is, this one has so much flavor, I don't wanna detract from that. And sometimes I don't wanna just add a ton of sweetness when I just want the flavor to shine through of everything we just went to work for. So instead we're gonna do the ketchup because that's needed. That's not really a question here to me. You need to have some ketchup on there. So we're gonna spread this around. It's nothing special here other than just make sure that ketchup gets on it. And once we have it all spread around, I'm gonna just evenly finish off, and then we're gonna put this right into the oven. We're gonna let it bake. Now the important thing with meatloaf is it needs to bake all the way through. So take the temperature of it even, because you wanna make sure it's baked all the way in the middle. It's a lot of meat. But then we'll enjoy it then too. So the meatloaf is baked, and I wanna be really real and raw with you. I bake it on a sheet pan because some of the grease then is able to go out of it and not just sit and kind of boil in it. And so it looks ugly when it comes out, but this is how we always did it. And then no one needs to know it because you can just remove it from this original platter or sheet pan and put it up onto just a fresh one. And then look, there we go. All easy peasy, fresh, beautiful. Let me wash my hands now as it has the ketchup on it. But that's the thing. I think sometimes we forget what things can actually look like when they come out because we're used to seeing them a certain way on something, online, whatever it is. And I want you to know what it looks like, and that's what it looks like, and that's okay. So here we have now beautiful meatloaf. It's simple, it's delectable. It's just really, it's homey and cozy. Honestly, this is what we had so often growing up. And that's what I think I love about it. Any meatloaf to me, look at that, how tender it is. Oh, it's so beautiful. And look at all that beauty. It holds together, but you can tell it is just super tender. And you see little pieces of the carrot, but the carrot just will melt in your mouth. And that's what's important here. You get just a hint of the glaze. Guys, I'm excited here. Guys, this is so good. It's good because it remembers like what you had maybe at grandma's growing up, whatever. And if you used to think, I don't have good memories of it, this is what you want to remember. Full of flavor. You get a beautiful, like meaty beefiness, but not in a gross way. You get this rounded flavor from the vegetables we added in. You get just a hint of sweetness from that ketchup on top, but not cloyingly so that it takes away from the actual contents. This is beautiful. This is delicious. This is homey. This is cozy. It's filling. It's nourishing. That's what's important here. So what do I hope you do with this? I hope you make meatloaf. I hope you enjoy it at the time, but also make delicious leftovers with it. Honestly, you can use it wherever you want to use ground meat too. Break it up, use it in something else if you want to, but I think you're gonna love this and you're gonna love it as sandwiches. Share the recipe around so everyone can see meatloaf deserves a spot in your rotation. Believe me, it does. Check my website, wiseguy.com for this recipe. All my other recipes, they're on there and they're just as good. Enjoy.